Welcome back to Following Know It On, a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 38, and we're doing chapters 55 through 58 to the end of part 3 of Words of Radiance. I have received many comments, many messages about this specific episode waiting for the Kaladin-Adolin duel. This scene is quite famous in the fandom, a fan favorite, if you will, and a lot of people are looking forward to both of y'all's reactions to this episode. So we'll start with you,
No
Paul.
pressure, I guess.
No pressure. Start with you, Paul. How are you feeling?
You want my reactions to this? Well, I'm feeling great. I'm skipping ahead. My two words are chaos and loyalty.
Okay. Chaos and loyalty. Elliot, how are you feeling?
Feeling great. These chapters were crazy. Crazy indeed. Do you want my two words?
Sure.
The two words I had to go with for these chapters were wind and wow.
Wind and wow. Chaos and loyalty. All right, let's jump into this Adolin Kaladin duel. Okay, just to clarify, it's not an Adolin Kaladin duel, it's an Adolin and Kaladin duel.
Dueling the rest of the world.
In a dueling arena
Right.
together, side by side.
The bros, the homies.
Yes. It's quite the intense game of Super Smash Brothers or something
Yes,
going on.
exactly. All
The
right,
whole everyone got involved.
Elliot, talk to me about your two words, wind and wow. I feel like they're pretty self-explanatory, though.
Yeah, kind of pretty much. I mean, yeah, wow. I was not expecting this kind of wrap up to chapter 3. I was expecting something big. I thought we were going to get, something very plot heavy, some big reveal, something to lead us into the rest of the book, but to have like this much adrenaline pumping like action through this segment of just, like wow, I didn't have any other word to describe it. And then I just had to pick wind for one moment during the duel where Kaladin is facing down two of the shard bearers on his own, and he just like has this moment where he returns to that like Kaladin is one with the wind, state where he's just dodging left and right, and he's not even thinking about what he's doing. He's just being awesome. Like that was such a cool scene that harkened back to a lot of what we've seen Kaladin do in his journey so far, from his spear wielding moment down in the chasms to the dodging all the Parshendi arrows while wearing all the carapace to now Kaladin facing down two shard bearers with nothing but a knife. Like, man,
Yeah.
so cool.
I'll get to you, Paul, here in a second, but just a little food for thought until we get back to this. This is the first time since sort of probably the end of part 2 that we have seen Kaladin fight to protect specifically. And it's also the first time we've seen this wind reference in quite a long time. So it's if you tie it back to his oath of I will protect, and we get our wind metaphor here. And while you're drinking out of your salsa bowl, Paul, I will ask you to explain your two words.
Thank you. That was refreshing. So my two words, chaos and loyalty, kind of go against each other, I guess. But chaos is kind of like Elliot's wow. The whole duel time frame there, which went on for a while, which I loved. was very chaotic, and there was a whole lot of moving pieces and stuff going on. So it was kind of all over the place, just everywhere. Loyalty, though, I actually put a good bit of thought into this. It's for, I guess, multiple sides. It's almost like two sides of a coin. There's the loyalty that we see like with Renarin, as he shows up and kind of like wants to stand by his brother's side, um, and things like that. But on the flip side of that, we see where a lot of people's loyalties lie, and I think that was kind of a big revealing moment for a lot of characters, because a lot of the characters we've seen really haven't been put under that much stress. I'm thinking of Elokar here, and while he's literally the king, so he's always under stress, I'm sure, right? He's got stuff going on. This was where he was like tested by someone we've seen, which being like Dalinar. He kind of talks to him, confronts him, and him and some other characters, their loyalties don't lie to Dalinar quite. It's more of like a following rules, following traditions, things like that, and kind of a interesting approach. And I feel like we got to learn a lot about characters we've seen for a while in a different way, kind of like in a how they act way instead of just hearing about them, which I thought was really cool.
Cool. There's another couple characters that I'll come back to with loyalty, but we'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
But first, before we jump into the dueling arena, if you will, we have a chapter 55, and Hoyd is kind of the main character of this chapter, and so we're not skipping it. We're going to spend some good time on chapter 55 because Hoyd is special to me. And once again, shout out to Michael Kramer's performance in this episode. Whenever one of these characters recognizes Hoyd and they all say "you," Michael Kramer uses like the same voice for all three of them, and Hoyd has the same reaction to all three of them. It's really funny where Callan say "you" and Hoyd would be like "me," and Michael Kramer's really good at it. So I just wanted to say appreciate that. Did either of you care about Hoyd? I enjoy Hoyd whenever he shows up, but
I certainly did. I laughed. I laughed at the way that Adolin, Kaladin, and Shallan all recognize him, all for very different reasons. They all have a very different image of who they think he is. And then I love too that Shallan just like runs up and gives him a hug, and Adolin's like, "You don't hug Wit.
you don't hug
You're not
Wit.
supposed to like him." Just that whole sequence was pretty comical.
I did. I really loved that, and specifically what Elliot was saying was my favorite part about it was everyone sees Hoyd there, and literally all three of them have had such vastly different experiences with Hoyd that like what does he do, honestly? Like what do you say like if you're him at this point? Like I don't know. But yeah, I'm always happy to see Hoyd, and I think it's kind of funny that this is like not the big thing going on, because usually we'd be like, ooh, oh, a Hoyd, like we see Wit again, like everyone sit down, let's think about this for a while, and there's great stuff, but there's a large object casting a big shadow this episode, so
There is.
Before we move on from Hoyd, though, I totally agree. It was mostly, comic relief, fun little section on Hoyd. But there was one little throwaway comment that actually caught my eye as perhaps a bit more intriguing, that maybe tells us a little bit about Hoyd, actually. It's after Shallan gives him that hug. Adolin kind of half jokingly, half serious is like, back off, man. She's my girl. And they get into basically, I think it's Adolin tells him, stick to women your own age. And then Hoyd makes an interesting comment back. He says, that would be pretty difficult for me, actually. I believe there's only one woman in these parts that would, fall into that category. And like, that's it. And it kind of moves on. But I kind of pause there like, well, hold on a second. How old is Hoyd? Like, that kind of makes the implication that maybe he's like way older than we think he might be. Is he like a couple 100 years old or something like that? Is he? We've already gotten the impression that he's not human, if you will. He's something different. So that doesn't surprise me that maybe he is, 900 years old or something ridiculous like that. But almost even more intriguing is there's else who's also in his category, and it's a woman. Who is this person? Like, have we met this person? Have we this person before? Who else is out there with Hoyd like history? It was just like one sentence here, but it got me thinking.
I have no idea.
For sure.
Uh-huh.
I was thinking about this too. I briefly thought about like who could it be? Have we seen this person or not? I feel like the only person I can think of that might fit into this, and I'm sure one of y'all will have a point that will just ruin this, which is fine. But we had an interlude chapter, right? And there was the like, at least she's portrayed very evilly. She like would kill people and steal a whole bunch of stuff or whatever. I don't know if y'all remember the interlude I'm talking about. I cannot remember the name. It's from the perspective of like her henchman, I guess.
Ah, yes, the mistress.
Yes, the mistress. That's the only kind of mythical-ish woman I can think of that like he could be alluding to. That was the only thought I went to with that, but I'm not invested in that theory, but I don't know if she's old or not, but
I like that train of thought. There was definitely an air of mysticism around, that person, the mistress of, she seemed like she could be something a little bit different. So I like that train of thought.
I wish I could do a spoiler edit director's cut of this episode and put a great joke right here, but I can't.
You could just deafen us and then just cut it out and save it for later or something.
In a year and a half, when we're allowed to know whatever this joke is, you can come back and recut this episode.
We'll come back to this, and you can tell your joke, and we'll be like, "We waited a year and a half for this,"
right?
And then we'll probably move on.
It'll be like, ha ha.
Whoa, but
one of my favorite banters, if you will, in this chapter is Hoyd and Kaladin, and Wit keeps making fun of Kaladin for losing his flute because he left it in Sadius's war camp.
I forgot about that. Yes, and that was very funny.
Yeah, and Kaladin's like, well, why don't you just tell me another story? And Hoyd's like, well, I would, but I don't have my flute because somebody lost my flute. And Kaladin's like, I'm sorry. That's it.
I'm pretty disappointed in Kaladin with that, honestly. Like, when the strange mystical guy who clearly has like some magical powers and can tell you a story with the smoke of a fireplace, when he hands you a flute and he says, don't lose this, you don't lose that. You hold on to that. And Kaladin lost it.
He also told him that he was expecting him to be able to play it by the time they met next. And as far as we know, Kaladin hasn't touched it, hasn't thought about it twice. Granted, he's had a lot on his mind, but,
Yeah.
Fair.
Shallan and... I almost said Shallan and Amaram. That would have been weird. Shallan and Adolin go to a menagerie. And this isn't terribly important, but Shallan talks about a chicken. I don't know if you guys picked this up, but she describes a parrot as a chicken, and she says the only shell that, or maybe this is Kaladin's point of view, but the only shell it has is in its beak, and so he has no idea how it survives high storms. And it's really it's funny to me that all that the Rosharan Alethi think of parrots as chickens, which, side note, on Brandon Sanderson's live streams, he has, it's not a parrot, but he has a bird, and The name of his bird is escaping me right now, but everybody calls it a chicken because of this scene. That everybody says it's a chicken in his chat.
That's funny. All right, I have to go back for 1 second here, Trevor.
Sure.
So this just popped into my mind immediately whenever you almost said Shalon and Amaram. So I don't know that I'm not super versed in all the experienced Stormlight like banter and such, but I have gotten that all the, I guess, couples you could say kind of have like a joint name or whatever. What did we? I don't remember what we called. Was it Caitlin or something like
Caitlin.
that? Yeah,
Kaladin and Adolin.
I thought of Shalom. I thought of if you combo them, it'd be Shalomaram.
Oh no,
that's funny. Ugh, Shalomaram.
You're oh dear.
You're starting something you don't want to start, Paul. I promise.
Please comment on this video if you think it's Shalomaram or Amalon.
Okay. If you ship Shalon and Amaram together, and how you would say the couple name.
Would it be Shalamaram or Amalon? I'm a Shalamaram.
You have to be able to
myself.
You have to be able to say it first.
I've said it like 3 times. Give me a break. But yes. Please comment your thoughts.
Oh boy.
I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
Wise.
It's Shalamaram.
Speaking of Amaram, he shows up at the end of this chapter after they're done looking at chickens in cages. And it's kind of a throwaway comment in this chapter, but Dalinar names Amaram the head of the Knights Radiant, the lead knight for the Knights Radiant. He says he's reforging the Knights Radiant, and he gives Amaram a fancy cloak and says, "You're the leader of the Knights Radiant." Kaladin is understandably not very happy with this, but what were you guys' thoughts here? Based on what we know of the Knights Radiant, based on what Dalinar knows here, he assumes Amaram's a good guy, but we know differently, so
I think it makes logical sense from Dalinar's perspective. It's kind of someone he can, at this point, he trusts,
right,
and he knows has a lot of like in-depth experience. Like I feel like if he didn't appoint Amaram, he would be trying to appoint someone like Adolin or something, and I feel like he wouldn't have as much faith for them to be like the complete leader of the whole deal there and stuff. So it makes sense. Some other thoughts I had about it were, one, the description of the cloak seemed awesome. I kind of want one. Wasn't it like black with like gold symbols on it or something like that? I thought that was really cool. Aside from that, we see that Kaladin is very frustrated about this, and now he really doesn't really want people to know he's a surge binder because he doesn't really want to be working with Amaram. My last thought, and probably the only important one, is with him being the leader of the Knights Radiant. My thought was, is that he just gonna stay there because he's like an experienced general, like in general, or a general in general? He's a big war leader in general, or does he have experience with Surge Binder or know much about it, or the Knights Radiant and things like that? Is he gonna be a Knights Radiant of some sorts, or what? So, not quite sure with all that.
This has got to be the most confusing part of this series of chapters for me by far. And it's not the fact that Dalinar chooses Amaram as the leader. I agree with you, Paul, that I think from Dalinar's choice, like, who else is he going to pick? That's not that far of a stretch for me. What's confusing to me is, why is this not a bigger deal? This is, like you said, Trevor, kind of like a throwaway mention at the end of the chapter, and then we're right into the duel, right? In the very next chapter. It's like, hold on a second. we've talked before about what a huge uproar it would cause if Dalinar were to refound the Knights Radiant and go out and say, "Hey, we're starting this order up again." Where's that uproar? Where is that, like, why is no one even mentioning this for the rest of these chapters through the end of the part? When I saw this at the end of this chapter, I thought, oh, this is going to be the big plot point for the rest of this. And then they like don't even mention it. It's like mentioned maybe a little bit in reference to the fact that Amram doesn't get up and fight later on in the duel. But like, man, how are they not talking about this?
There's Amarim and Dalinar are at the menagerie because they're looking for Adolin, and there is a crowd around them. They do cause a commotion, but you're right. At the duel, nobody's looking at Amaram, nobody's looking at this cloak or anything like that. So
I'm assuming this is going to be pretty critical going forward of what this looks like. Are we actually founding the Knights Radiant? They even talk about it in a couple of instances that they ask the question of, does Amaram have surge binding abilities? And they're assuming he doesn't. I think it's like Sigzil, I think actually, that like pipes in with, well, clearly Amaram doesn't have surge binding abilities. And Callan kind of counters with, well, I'm hiding my abilities. Could he be hiding his? And so there's kind of that question out there. I'm hoping this becomes a something we dive into in part 4 of what this looks like, how everyone else responds to this founding of the Knights Radiant, and Amram's now the chief of that. But it gets very overshadowed by what happens in the next couple of chapters here.
I'll go ahead and bring this up now. I'm spoiling some of the rest of the episode, but we can talk a little bit out of order. With the amount of anger that Kaladin has towards Amaram, how would Dalinar now react if Kaladin lost it and decapitated the head of the Knights Radiant that Dalinar just put there? Like, if Kaladin, I mean, Kaladin's not in a good headspace at the end of this episode, but we haven't got there yet. But if later down the road, if he just loses it and takes matters into his own hands and kills Amaram, what is Dalinar going to do? Dalinar's already upset at Kaladin by the end of this episode, but getting a little ahead of ourselves.
True, and he even, I don't think we touched on it with last week's episode, but when Kaladin was flying around, right, he had really kind of been getting the hang of that. He kind of sees Amaram's camp or something. He's like, after all, why shouldn't I? Why
Right.
shouldn't I just like go in and kill him and fly out or something? Like, I could definitely do it. So,
And that actually scares Syl, but
sure does.
all right, are we ready for chapter 56?
Let's fight.
I'm kidding. We can.
So Adolin, I'm trying to remember how this chapter starts, but I don't remember. But the Adolin is talking to his sword, or going to talk to his sword, and doesn't know what to say. He's sitting here thinking he's about to go up against 2 people. Little does he know he's about to go up against 4. But he's sitting here, and Renarin's giving him the checklist of, oh, did you eat chicken? Are you wearing mom's handkerchief or whatever it is? Or necklace? I don't remember what it is.
Yeah, necklace.
And
Mom's handkerchief.
he misses the necklace, but he's eating like 2 full plates of chicken because, tradition or whatever. And Renarin sends a runner to go get the necklace. So Renarin's still at the arena when all of this goes down, because that's important, because he comes running out to help. But I wanted to stop on Adolin talking to his sword. We've brought this up before, and Eliot, you said that you wouldn't be at all surprised if Shardblades had like a spren that you could talk to, because Shallan talks to sticks, so why can't Adolin talk to Shardblades? So did either of you notice Adolin trying to talk to his sword again, or if that's just a weird quirk of his? What's happening here?
I did definitely notice that. I didn't put a whole lot of thought into it. It was more of like I don't know, he almost talking to himself, right? Like it in a realistic sense. He's talking to himself through it. He's like, all right, so we're really doing this, aren't we? um and stuff. But I didn't think too much about it. It's very possible that he was talking to some other being and didn't know it. Um but yeah, I basically took it surface value.
Yeah, I think I pondered on the sentience of Shardblades last time we saw Adolin doing this, talking to his Shardblade, and yeah, I'm definitely not ruling it out. Like you said, we've seen Shallan talk to a stick, so for Adolin to talk to a Shardblade, definitely within the realm of possibility. But yeah, I didn't think too much on it this time. I just kind of categorized this as part of Adolin's routine that he has, and how that routine gets broken by the fact that he doesn't have his mom's necklace or whatever that is, and how for an athlete or a performer that can be a big deal. Actually, some people might write that off as, oh, it's just a good luck charm, make your own luck kind of thing, just get out there and do it. But having like a routine that gets you into the right mindset going into any sort of performance or athletic bout is actually really important. So this
Right.
could certainly throw him off. But yeah, if the Shardblade were to like speak up and respond, I wouldn't be surprised. Not one bit. Of course, it would probably just be like, I am a Shardblade.
I am a Shardblade.
No, I will not catch on fire. I am a Shardblade. I'm a Shardblade.
All right, so Adolin walks out, and 4 other shard bearers walk out to come fight him. There was a loophole in this duel that he had with Relis, and Relis brings 3 buddies instead of 1, and it's apparently part of the rules that you can just bring however many you want in a disadvantaged duel. So as long as Adolin is numbers down, this is still technically a disadvantaged duel. So he can have 2 people come help him. Now, nobody wants to, but you could have 2 people come help him. And shout out to Renarin, because he doesn't have his shard plate on, and he just, like, almost immediately he comes out and pulls one of the shard bearers away from Adolin. What were your guys' thoughts on the first half of this duel before Kaladin jumps in?
So it was very action packed, and honestly, it made it pretty evident that obviously Adolin is in this 1 versus 4 and he can't win it, but he is like leagues above all of them individually and can even like hold his own and kind of throw him back a little bit. Um, so yeah, it made it look really, really interesting and really exciting, but you kind of knew that could only last so long. Um, and then Renoin came out, and that was a slight shock for me. I was expecting someone else, I guess, but when I had the reveal there, I thought that was really cool. But also, I thought he was gonna get clobbered.
Yeah, what a moment when Renarin comes out to his brother's aid. Like, wow, that was powerful right there. I mean, such courage there from Renarin. He knows he could just straight up die, in this
Right.
moment. He is almost certainly going to die. He knows that he is not on the level of these shard bearers. He knows that he has his fits of epilepsy, and going out there without shard blade or without shard plate is suicide, and he does it to save his brother. Like, wow, my respect for Narin was already fairly high already. I like the guy, but that man, he just shot himself up to like favorite character territory with this. This is a cool move here. I love this.
Yeah. One of my favorite moments of the duel is all four shard bearers are about to engage Adolin at the very beginning, and Adolin hears Xyle's voice above the crowd, and this is definitely one of those movie moments of like right before the race starts, you hear the coach's voice, and you're like, the athlete hears the coach's voice in his head, like, you know, whatever the strategy is, and Xyle says, "Give it to him. They're afraid of you. Don't treat this like a duel. Treat this like a fight for your life, because that's what this is." And Adolin says, "Oh yeah, okay," and then just steps into like this aggressive stance. I don't remember which stance he pulls to start, but instead of like trying to like back away and dance back and forth between each of the shard bearers, he just throws himself at one of them and cracks a lot of their shard blades. I don't remember all the technicalities of what happens, but that's one of my favorite moments. Is Xyle's just like, you're screwed anyway, just go, like make him afraid of you.
I did really like that. I actually thought at one point, I was like, what if Xyle hops in here, you know? That would be pretty crazy. He didn't, and I didn't really think he was, but it did cross my mind with all that going on. And once they're in a more rough stance, for me, whenever it first like mentions like, oh, someone else has walked out, like someone's coming to help, I definitely thought it was gonna just be Kaladin right out of the gate. I was like, okay, Kaladin's just gonna hop in there and give him the work, but it was Renarin, and I was afraid that it still was just gonna be bad, and they were both just gonna die.
Right.
Thankfully, that was not the case. Largely due to Shallan, I would say. Well, Shallan, by advising Pattern to kind of go help Renarin, but I thought that was pretty cool.
But before we go any further in the duel, though, I do want to. I need your guys' help to think about who exactly we're fighting here, because I feel like this is actually pretty important, and it took me actually a little while to figure this out. So we know he's fighting against Relis and Eliot and Yakimov, which is a big surprise, and a new name. At least I think it's a new name. Abrobadar. Is that
the way they say it in the book is Abrobadar.
Abrobadar. I was trying to figure out where all these guys are from. So we know that none of them are from Sadeas's camp directly, although we know that Sadeas is kind of orchestrating all of this in the background. I believe I picked up in this chapter that Relis and Eliot, they're cousins, right? We learned that from before. They're from Ruthar's camp, I think is what this says.
Yep.
And then it specifically mentioned that Abrobadar is from Aladar's camp. Do we know where Yakimov is from?
We've been told. I don't remember though.
Yeah, I think that's kind of funny because he's the only one that we've seen like much before, right?
Yeah,
because he was like a friend of Adolin,
right?
Whatever, and
he's Adolin's drinking buddy.
Yeah, and so we had heard that, and yeah, I don't know where he's from.
Right, I'll have to go see if we can look that up if that's something we've learned prior to this. But where I'm going with all this is not just like Sadeas's doing. This is the coming together of all of their enemies working together in one, what they are thinking is going to be the master stroke to bring down and Adolin. And we've seen before just how hard it is to get the different high princes to work together to do anything. So the fact that they're willing to come together to try and undercut Adolin and Dalinar with this rather dirty move that they pull, this shows a level of coordination amongst them that I don't know that we've seen yet. And again, this might depend on kind of where Yakimov is from, whether this is like 3 different camps working together or just
Roeon's
2.
camp. I just looked it up.
Roeon, awesome. So it is a 3rd camp then. So there are 3 different high princes, 3 different houses working together to do this underhanded trick and try and bring down Adolin Dalinar. That seems pretty important to me right there.
And none of them are Sadeas, so.
Right.
Which plays into the fact that we don't know the politics here, but Amaram isn't willing to go help Dalinar because he's in Sadius's war camp. That's where he's from, is Sadius's princedom. So I'm sure he was told by Sadius, do not go help Adolin here. So that's why.
Yep.
I was kind of glad that happened. Once we knew that Renarin and Adolin were going to be okay, I was kind of glad that happened because I think that will start a more serious conversation, or hopefully between Dalinar and Amaram. Like, what was going on there, you know? Which, albeit, Amaram could very easily be like, I don't think I would have like made it against 4 Shardbearers, you know, whatever.
Right.
There's kind of a scapegoat there, but it still, I hope will lead between maybe Dalinar seeing more about Amaram, or talking to him, figuring something out. So
I hope the same, because Dalinar did notice it. That's mentioned a couple times, that Dalinar does note that he looked to Amaram to step in, and he doesn't. And Kaladin, I think, even brings that up later on when they're talking about his accusation there. He points out Amaram didn't come to the rescue. What was up with that? So yeah, maybe that is the seed of doubt that'll get planted there in Dalinar's mind as far as Amaram's concerned.
At the beginning of chapter 57, which is halfway through this duel, Shallan, we get like a page of point of view from Shallan, and she's sitting next to Sabariel, and Sabariel's saying, "Oh, why doesn't he surrender? This is stupid. He should just surrender, give up his shards, move on with life." And they don't see what's happening, but they've threatened Adolin to say, "You will not surrender, or we will kill Renarin." That's the threat that they've given him. And so when Shallan realizes that Adolin's not going to surrender, she sends Pattern to go distract Adobadar, I think it is, who's sitting in front of Renarin.
I noticed this as well, which there's a cool little bit in here too, actually, about Shallan. Shallan already trusts Adolin a lot. Like she doesn't send Pattern to trust, or she doesn't send Pattern to help Adolin because she thinks, well, obviously he hasn't surrendered, so he's obviously got a plan. Like I don't want to mess with that, but hey, go help Renarin out. Try and make sure he doesn't get killed. So that was a cool moment there from Shallan. But I think the most important bit out of all of this for me is that later during the battle, Syl notices Pattern.
She does.
And she heads off to like investigate. And we don't hear anything more about that for the rest of these chapters, which I was really hoping we would. But this may start a plot line that we've been anticipating for a little while, of interactions perhaps between Syl and Pattern.
yes, I'm very excited, and I also love how it happened in very typical Syl fashion. So Kaladin kind of jumps in, and Syl's like, "Ooh, what's that?" and just goes off.
Bye.
Right.
We know exactly what she saw, but she's just like, "Ooh."
It's also very typical Brandon Sanderson fashion, where it's this one-liner that, I mean, might be important, might not, but you won't know for at least 3 more chapters, because that's how many we've read. So I just want to highlight Kaladin's quote here of honor. Like, Dalinar is asking the crowd, "Where is our honor?" And Kaladin steps up beside him and says, "Honor is dead, but I'll see what I can do." And that's a fan favorite quote from everybody. It's a really good one.
That is a mic drop moment for sure. And so powerful. Oh man, this was a good scene. I agree with all the fans out there who love this scene. This may be one of my favorites so far that we've read, just for the powerful scene that we have depicted of us, of clearly Adolin and Renarin are fighting against overwhelming odds. They're going to be beaten. They're probably going to die. and Dalinar's looking to all the Alethi, high princes, the ones that are supposed to be, these honorable knights and whatnot, and says, who will help? Who will step down and help sons after they've been betrayed? And none of them will even look at him. Elokar won't help. Amaram won't help. None of these other high princes will help. And who steps up to do the right thing where all these light eyes are failing? Of course, it's Kaladin. Of course, it's Kaladin that steps up to protect people he doesn't even really like. He doesn't even really like Adolin and Renarin. He doesn't like Light Eyes, but he knows this is the right thing to do, and so he steps up and he does it. I love it.
I actually want to slightly disagree. Not really disagree, but think about it slightly differently. So I don't fully fault the other Light Eyes for not going in because from their perspective, it's kind of like a death sentence to hop in there, or you're just throwing away your shards or something because you're still at disadvantage, and there should be no way that you win.
Right.
And also, Kaladin does go in, and he is doing the right thing. I guess it's typical Kaladin fashion, but he kind of views it as he's doing his job almost. He's very much like, well, I guess I am supposed to be their bodyguard, so I guess I'll hop in and try and save them, and stuff. And I don't want to take away from his heroicism, but it wasn't that. What's the word I'm looking for? Honorable? Well, I don't know. It was more of a loyalty thing, I would say. Like he did it because he's loyal to Dalinar, and Dalinar was kind of pleading for help, um, and stuff. I feel like more than
You're
that,
on.
but he does know it's the right thing. He did know for sure, whether or not he said it.
That's Elokar's point later. Is this is that's Kaladin's job. You're freaking out about him protecting in a bodyguard when he was invited to help in a duel, but Dalinar thinks it's amazing. As well he should.
I'm gonna bash on Kaladin for a second, or in a second, when he makes I think a rather stupid decision. But I do want to defend him just a little bit here, in that I don't think this falls in any way under his job description, if you will. This is a duel that has been agreed to by all parties. These should not be enemies necessarily. At any point in this, Adolin and Renarin can yield. They can get out of this, and so while their lives are definitely in danger here or at stake, they can back out of this at any point. And so for Kaladin, I feel like should not be obliged to step in and do this. And so the fact that he does still goes down in my book as something impressive, I guess, in that I didn't feel like he needed to do that or should have been expected to. And so for him to go ahead and step up and do it definitely was impressive. But yeah, I can definitely see the other side of that, and where Elokar does come out later on with an argument. But Elokar makes me a little angry later. We'll talk about that. But yeah,
I can definitely agree there. Yeah, and Kaladin definitely is being heroic here. He's 100%. He like knows what he's doing, but I guess it's kind of like a not again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Attitude and stuff towards it. So
Some minutia in the duel. Kaladin is using his surge binding in the fight, hoping nobody notices. And like we said, Syl sees pattern and leaves Kaladin for a quick second. And then the mechanics at work here that we've been told about shard plate is really, really funny, because as the shard plate loses its stormlight, it locks up and it can't move. But Adolin uses that to his advantage. He's already taken down 2 two shard bearers, and there's one in front of him facing Kaladin. And as it locks up on him, he jumps on this shard bearer's back and pulls him down on top of him. I just
Bear hugs him, I imagine.
right, and I I just really like that, like using that mechanic of shard plate. It's very like it would make sense in the world that we've been given. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that was one thing that like, so there were I had two favorite moments from this fight. One of which I want to briefly go back to. The second of which was this. I thought it was hilarious, and as it kept talking about him losing Stormlight from his shard plate, and it was getting heavier, locking up, all this stuff. I was like, please tell me he's just gonna like pen someone and they just can't move. Like, please tell me. And I was so happy when it happened. Oh my goodness, it was great. The other thing, which so you briefly mentioned, Calvin was trying to, he still wants to mask his surge binding, and he, it talks about it was a super bright day, like people can't really see him inhaling Stormlight. But I think people were still going to ask a lot of questions because he did drop kick someone in the chest and break their shard plate.
The chest plate, yeah.
And that was one of my favorite like things I've seen so far in a fight, because it talks about how he just like jumped and then like lashed himself down like 10 times in like a short distance, and he literally broke both of his legs, just like crashing into the shard plate, just shattered his legs. Then he kind of gets down, he's like, whoa.
Ow.
And then thankfully, I guess Stormlight's pretty effective. It's pretty strong, so it just kind of healed his legs and he was all right. But I thought that was incredible, because he's just looking at these shard bears and he's like, what do I do? Like, how do I do this? And he's like, guess I'll try this. So thankfully it was enough force to actually break it. If not, then he would have just used up all the Stormlight for nothing. So
Yeah,
but those
awesome.
are my favorite fight moments.
Awesome scenes here as Brandon Sanderson describes this duel. I mean, you feel like you're there. You can just picture the cinematic cuts of each of these scenes. It was just so well described. I think this was some of the best Sanderson descriptive writing I think we've read, at least that I can remember, through this section of just, the way he's describing the mechanics of this fight. You can just picture the whole thing in your mind, which is so cool. I really loved it.
So moving on from the action of the duel, we get a few Easter eggs in here. One was Syl noticing pattern. The other, well, there's two other ones. The other one is Kaladin performs the last clap maneuver that he learns from Xyle, and then he hears screaming. What are your guys' thoughts on this? Any predictions?
I didn't really pick up on that until just now. I honestly don't remember that. I mean, I guess if it mentioned screaming, I guess I would have just thought of like a crowd going or roaring or something. I didn't think about that, but maybe it plays into the whole do shard blades have Spren thing. Maybe the Spren was screaming at him. He was like, what? What? You caught me? Like, you can't do that. No.
So I was thinking about this a lot more the second time I read through, and I'm trying to think back. This is the first time Kaladin has ever touched a shard blade. I think it is.
It is.
If I have to think back. Even all the way back to when he first killed that first shard bearer, which we now suspect heavily was Helleran. I don't think he ever touched the shard blade. I don't think that shard blade ever came in contact with him. And so this being the first time he's ever touched one, this seems really significant to me. The fact that when he touches the blade, it seems like both him and this is what, Relis, I think?
It's Relis, yeah.
Yeah, him and Relis appear to hear this screaming, but no one else seems to hear this screaming. And so I'm tying this in my mind to Sill's aversion to shard blades somehow. I think, she's always been like, "Oh, don't touch shard blade, or that's not great." Somehow she knows that they're like, this is part of why she's so doesn't like shard blades. At least I think. And my theory on this is that I think it was a Spren that they heard the voice of. I
Okay.
don't think it was Sill, because later on, like just a couple paragraphs later, it talks about how Sill's like reveling in the joy of the wind or something like that. So it doesn't make sense to me that Sill would go from screaming to, all excited about the, adrenaline of the fight, seconds later. I think it was either, yeah, the spren of the blade itself, or what if it was the spren of the original Knight Radiant who was betrayed by the knight when they broke their vows? And we don't know all the details of how all of that even worked. Although I'm going to talk about some of the epigraphs that we've seen in this part with maybe a little bit of theories on some of that here in a second. But if you're running with the theory of the Knights Radiance of old on the Day of Recreance broke their bonds with the Spren, betraying them. Is this like the latent screams of that Spren who was betrayed by the original knight? That's kind of my theory on this, that I think that's what happened here.
Do you remember what Relis says as he's running willy-nilly out of the arena?
I do vaguely. You may have to help me. He says something about like, "I didn't kill you," or something like that. And that was part of playing into my thoughts here of, if the Spren is, screaming at them about his betrayal, and Relis is just kind of confused of like, "I didn't betray you. I didn't kill you. I'm not." I think that's where that was going. This is all theories, all guesses. But yeah, I feel like that was very important, that moment there. All because he did the last clap maneuver, which Zyle told him never to do, because it's dumb. But it apparently worked.
It is.
It did.
It is dumb.
It's risky. Okay.
Uh-huh.
It obviously was not dumb then, because it kind of worked, but very,
It's
very risky.
it's last ditch, right? You've got no
Yeah.
other choice. You might as well try and catch the blade that's going to kill you if you don't.
True.
There's one more part in here that I want to highlight before we move on to the boon here in a second. Renarin. Adolin, or maybe it's Kaladin. Kaladin yells at Renarin to yield as he's being charged by Relis. Did either of you pick up on Renarin's reaction? This is he's kind of on the ground after he's had an epileptic seizure, and everybody in the fight has dismissed him as not part of the duel anymore. And when Relis realizes, I'm going to lose this duel, he goes to try to kill Renarin. Do any of you remember Renarin's reaction?
I remember this, but I don't remember his reaction specifically. I do remember that because they were afraid they would kind of use him as leverage to still win, but I don't remember his reaction.
I remember at one point, I think it's Kaladin notices that Renarin is crying, but that might be a little bit earlier in the fight. If I'm trying to remember this scene right, Relis is charging over to Renarin. He's gonna, yeah, you assume he's gonna kill him, but then he stops and decides not to, I guess, and turns and attacks Kaladin. But in that moment, doesn't it describe Renarin as like just kind of like accepting his fate or something like that? That's kind of the impression I remember.
So Renarin's kneeling and he's crying and he's looking at his shard blade. Kaladin yells at him to yield, and Renarin looks up and dismisses his shard blade and is just resigned to accept what's about to hit him. Relis hesitates because he doesn't know if he really wants to kill. Renarin turns and swings at Kaladin. Last clap, blah, blah, blah. We already talked about that. But Renarin is having some very clear mental issues here. He's run in to try to save his brother and has this seizure and is super, I don't know, whatever you want to put here, but Renarin does resign his life, and he doesn't need to. He can surrender to the judge at any point, and he dismisses his Shardblade and kind of just looks at Relis and's waiting for this Shardblade hit. So there's something weird happening in Renarin's head here.
Yeah, I'm picking up on more of that now that you kind of explained that. I was so wrapped up in all the other events, I didn't really think too much about where Renarin's head was at with all this. I guess I'm just thinking maybe that's all just part of his struggle of wanting to identify as a warrior and he can't, and maybe this, failure is failure should what he probably at that point views as a failure to save his brother as a failure of him as a person. Maybe there's a lot more there though. I'm not really sure.
That's basically what I thought. I do remember that a little bit. I kind of took it as like I'm gonna give my life for the greater good, do my heroic thing. But yeah, you're right. There's literally no need for him to. Albeit the judge is, because Adolin tries to.
biased.
Yeah. The judge seems a little bit hard of hearing, I would say. Adolin tries to call out and surrender at one point, but she just doesn't hear him, so it ends up being a good thing, I guess, but because they win. But yeah,
I actually thought that was going to become a technicality, like later on, was that Adolin tried to yield words, and then in that moment I was like, oh no, he's going to win, but then they're going to like harken back to that moment, like, oh well, actually you yielded before you won. So I was glad that did not become a technicality and become a problem later, and he
thank
does
goodness.
ultimately win the whole thing, which was epic.
And he receives a boon from Elokar, and this whole mechanic was explained last week, and we didn't talk about it maybe earlier this week. I don't
I think it
remember.
was at some point this week, but I don't know either.
It was last week, I think, because Shallan is the one who ultimately discovers this, and so they're talking about it at one point, I think in one of the previous Shallan chapters.
I don't remember, but basically it's if you perform a feat of great strength, if you will, for the king, he can grant you a boon, and it will be granted really kind of no matter what it is, as long as it's not something crazy. And he challenges Sadeas to a duel right as he's just won 4v3 against these shard bearers. And before anyone can say anything else, the crowd's all quiet. Kaladin speaks up and says, "And for my boon, I want to duel Amaram." And then he gets arrested.
Kaladin really did that.
Do you blame him though? This is this is contentious within the Stormlight fandom, so careful what you say, because some people really do blame Kaladin here, and some people do not at all. So,
all right, I'll make some people upset. No, I'm kidding. So just double checking our bases here. Does Kaladin know how the boon system works? Does he like get it?
yes.
Because so like this is just awarded to Adolin, right? Like Kaladin doesn't actually get a boon, does he? Like Renarin doesn't get a boon, does he? Or do they all?
You know what? This was explained because it was explained in chapter 55. It was explained this week because it was explained in chapter 55 where Shallan and Adolin and Kaladin are all sitting in the carriage together. So Kaladin definitely knows how this mechanic works, and he's taking matters into his own hands here. So yes, he understands what's happening.
He understands what's happening, but I think he incorrectly jumps to the assumption that he has the right to claim this boon. And I think that in reading it from kind of an outsider's perspective, it seemed fairly clear to me that only Adolin was getting offered this boon. And so for Kaladin to kind of jump to conclusions that, oh, and I get one too, I can totally see why he did it. I can totally see him thinking, this is my chance. This is my chance to get at Amaram without having to, stab him in his bed in the middle of the night in a dishonorable way. But if he had maybe taken a little more time to think about this, I think he should have understood why this was not something he had the right to claim at this point.
I agree with that pretty strongly, Elliot. Like, yeah, I think Kaladin was still kind of getting ahead of himself with just jumping in there like that. It was very much his spur of the moment decision making, which he kind of likes to do. So yeah, I do fault Kaladin for this. I'm not going to be too harsh on him, but I do think it was his fault, and he kind of should have known better. He just got really caught up in his own personal agenda instead of the group's agenda as a whole on what they were doing. So
that is certainly what Dalinar explains to him in next chapter.
Yeah.
And I think I'm kind of processing it as I don't think that what Kaladin did was wrong. I think that Amaram certainly does need to be called out. I think that for Kaladin to get a chance to duel Amaram and bring that to a closure, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's something that shouldn't happen, but Kaladin is not thinking this through. This is not the right time or the right place to do this. Even if it had worked, let's play this out a little bit. Even if this had worked and Adolin still got his duel with Sadeas, and then Kaladin gets his duel with Amaram. Nobody knows the dark history that Amaram has. And so even if Kaladin wins that duel, Kaladin is now the villain. He just took down one of the most honorable men of the Alethi nation, who is just named the leader of the new Knights Radiant. Like, there's no good ending to that path there, aside from, I guess, Kaladin would maybe feel better that he got his revenge, although I kind of even doubt that he would there. So Kaladin is letting the adrenaline and his desire, his thirst for revenge, drive his decision making, and I think it definitely lands him. I'm definitely going to be on the side of the fence of this was not the right move for Kaladin to make, especially given the time and place.
Yeah, it was straight up not cool.
True. I'm a big fan of Brandon Sanderson's writing of Dalinar in this final chapter, chapter 58, because you can totally understand Dalinar's frustration with what just happened. It finally happened. They finally trapped Sadeas in a duel. And who spoils it but the guy that you were just super proud of literally 10 seconds ago? And you're just like, he's so frustrated. He grabs him by the shoulder and just shakes him. He's like, we had it. We were there. We were doing it. And you put your own petty vengeance in front of our wider goals. And granted, he doesn't believe what Amaram did was the truth, but he's still so frustrated. And I think Brandon Sanderson's portrayal of Dalinar here is so good that you can totally understand everybody's point of view here. Kaladin trying to take his chance, Elokar being super angsty and frustrated, and like we were going to take down Sadeas, who was probably going to try to assassinate me. Like all sides here, you understand.
Yeah, it was definitely an emotional chapter in that chapter 58, in a frustration and anger, lots of negative emotions flying around in the final chapter there.
What are you guys' thoughts on Kaladin's final words to Syl of never going to trust a Light Eyes again? And that's how part 3 ends. He feels betrayed by Dalinar, or at least that's what he's telling himself in this sad time.
His sad boy hours.
Yes.
Hopefully, Syl can kind of talk him through it again, because he has these feelings often,
Right.
very often. And obviously, he has right to be upset right now. He thought he had it like within his grasp. He thought he was going to be able to duel Amaram. Um, and now he's in jail. So, yeah, quite the high and low of a day, you know.
Right.
I don't know. So I want to just say, you know, he'll get over it. He'll be fine. But also, I think he is gonna. I don't think he's gonna work with Dalinar anymore going forward. Or so. I think he's gonna just take it too personally, and I don't know, I don't know what he's gonna do, but
I sincerely worry that he's going to reconsider his position on Moash and Moash's other friends who were actively trying to assassinate Elokar. Not only did Kaladin just lose respect for Dalinar, he probably just lost even more respect for Elokar. And so he may go throw his lot in with them next. If I'm being honest, I think where this is going to go with his attitude towards Light Eyes is going to be very heavily dependent on what happens immediately following this. Dalinar has just told him, you know, hey man, go quietly, go to jail, chill out, I'll get you out. If Dalinar lets him sit there for like 6 months, Kaladin is going to be, you know, that bridge is going to be burnt. He's never going to work with Dalinar ever again. If Dalinar does, or any Light Eyes for that matter, if Dalinar does come through on this and doesn't forget Kaladin and does pursue like trying to resolve this actively, maybe he can build that relationship back up, and maybe Kaladin can come around to understand that, hey, what I did was maybe justified, but a little foolish at the same time, so we can get there. So whatever happens next, I think is going to be very important as to how Kaladin is going to treat the other not other Light Eyes, because he's not a Light Eyes, treat the Light Eyes around him going forward.
I agree. I think the only thing I want to add to that is I think the only way that we could see him coming back around, coming back around to Dalinar and them, is if there is a greater evil, I guess. Because as far as we've seen Kaladin, he's never been concerned with like the Parshendi or anything like that. It's just been kind of about himself, Light Eyes, personal vengeance things like personal development, stuff like that. But I feel like the Parshendi are becoming a much larger looming threat fairly quickly. And with that happening, it could kind of unify them again, whether he likes it or not. So,
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Are there any thoughts on this episode specifically before we get into wrapping up part 3?
I think we hit all the big stuff.
Okay. Eliot, I know you want to talk about epigraphs because you have noticed some interesting epigraphs going through part 3, so I will hand it over to you and you can have the floor.
All right. I want to get Paul's thoughts on these two as well. So I'll share a little bit of what I've thought about some of the epigraphs and maybe a little bit of a theory coming out of this part 3. You actually asked me about some of the epigraphs maybe a handful of episodes ago, and I pushed off your question to now. I wanted to see the rest of them from this whole part, because across all of part 3, we've been getting excerpts from Words of Radiance, that the in-world, book Words of Radiance that Shallan had at one point but lost and is trying to find again. And they've been really interesting. They've been really, actually sharing some really pertinent details about the Knights Radiant and like the different orders and maybe some of the interactions there. And so, but we've been given them in all the wrong order. We've been handed them one at a time, but then in this very jumbled order. They actually come with page and chapter numbers from this in-world book. And so what I really wanted to do when we finish this part, and what I just did before this, was go back and read them all in the correct order and see if I could decipher, what we can learn from this in-world Words of Radiance book. And going back and reading them through again, they're all super interesting, but as is becoming a strong theme with Mr. Brandon Sanderson's writing, it's not quite enough information to like draw conclusions. It's always cut off, right where I feel like where you're about to get the good information. So it's tantalizing. It's a bit tormenting, but we do learn some very interesting bits about at least a little bit about each of the different orders of Knights Radiant, which was really cool. They're all 10 of them are mentioned in at least one of the epigraphs through part 3. You get sometimes like a little nugget of information about them, like the Dustbringers are finicky about what you call them, and the Light Weavers are dangerous or something like that. There's a few other, different references, different stuff that I thought was all super interesting. But the most interesting one is one of the very last ones that's like in chronological order towards the end of this book of Words of Radiance. And I know I'm talking for super long here, but I wanted to read 2 of these, let you know what I thought, and then I want to know what you think, Paul, as well. So here's 2 of them back to back that are from, we're told, chapter 38 of this in-world Words of Radiance book. It says this: "Now, as the Windrunners were thus engaged, arose the event which has hitherto been referenced, namely that discovery of some wicked thing of eminence, though whether it be some rogueries among the Radiant's adherents or of some external origin, Avina would not suggest." And then the second one says, "That they responded immediately and with great consternation is undeniable, as these were primary among those who would forswear and abandon their oaths. The term recreance was not then applied, but has since become a popular title by which this event is named." There's kind of some fancy wording there that confuses me a little bit, but the gist from those little excerpts there is something wicked that it names there arose either within the orders of Knights Radiant or without. And I think it caused a division amongst the orders. I think some orders either turned like actively against each other and attacked each other, or just like didn't agree. I think there was a huge maybe disagreement amongst the orders of how to handle whatever this evil thing that appeared, or maybe like one of the orders of Radiance betrayed the rest and became this evil thing that happened. I don't know. There's not quite enough information here to give me the answer here, but this is where my brain is all headed with this. Paul, do you remember any of your thoughts on some of these? What are you thinking of this stuff?
Yeah, I do have a few thoughts. So first of which, I'm really glad you brought up the epigraphs, because I have been noticing for a while that there's all the epigraphs about the Knights Radiant. And honestly, that's what I'm most excited for. When we finish this book, I'm gonna buy the physical copy, and I really want to go like read them, because I don't quite pick it all up with the audiobook. But um with those 2 specifically, the first one, this is probably just incorrect, but it is the first thought that popped into my mind. Wait, do you actually mind reading the first one about the Windrunners one more time?
Sure. "Now, as the Windrunners were thus engaged, arose the event which had hitherto been referenced, namely that discovery of some wicked thing of eminence, though whether it be some rogueries among the Radiant's adherents or of some external origin, Avina would not suggest."
Okay. My first thought about that was actually back to the dark sphere at the beginning of our story. Um, because from what we've seen, Zeth is probably a Windrunner. We'll say he is. He's either a Windrunner or something, some anomaly. And just kind of the dark thing of eminence there.
Yeah.
Like, why would he have it or want it, or I don't know, stuff like that. I can't think into that too much because there's just not enough evidence as to what that is. But that's where my mind went. With the second one, with Recreance, I don't have any pressing thoughts about it in all honesty. But I think you're right. I think there is definitely a division, but I'm going off of onto that mostly based off of uh Syl and her dislike for cryptics. And we know that Pattern is a cryptic, right?
Right.
And he's with Shalon, who's a Knight's Radiant now, I guess. So there has to be some division or something going on there. So I think you're right. At least it's a disagreement. Maybe there was a big spread war, and those are the two sides or something, or maybe there's more sides. We'll see. But yeah, I'm very interested in that.
I do want to read one more, and it's from the same in-world chapter 38, and it's in front of chapter 41 of our copy of Words of Radiance, and it says, "This act of great villainy went beyond the impudence which had hitherto been ascribed to the orders. As the fighting was particularly intense at this time, many attributed this act to a sense of inherent betrayal, and after they withdrew, about 2,000 made assault upon them, destroying much of the membership, but this was only 9 of the 10, as one said they would not abandon their arms and flee, but instead entertained great subterfuge at the expense of the other 9.
So I don't know if you have anything else you want to say, Trevor, before.
I just wanted to say there's definitely a division happening, whether that's 1v9, whether that's 3v7, whatever this is, there's definitely something happening here.
I see, and that's what I was thinking. So my thought was there's like 9 and 1 like betrayed, but it almost sounds like 9 betrayed and 1 stayed like held strong.
Right.
And so I'm really curious
Pause.
now as to what that is.
Think back to the prelude. 9 heralds betrayed 1, left 1 in damnation. Play. Keep going.
I do remember that. I was thinking of that specifically. That's been kind of a recurring theme. Also, okay, this could. I think I'm straight wrong about this, but with the prologue of this book with Yasna, because it shows all the like statues, right? It wasn't there one missing there.
There was one missing.
Okay, nice. So reoccurring themes for sure. 9 versus 1. And it sounds like it now that the 9 who left are kind of the bad guys, I guess. I don't know.
Okay.
So
good stuff.
So now, do we think that Kaladin and the Windrunners are maybe like the one good ones because that's our protagonist here? But we'll find that out. That's my current guess. We'd need a whole lot more information to guess another group, I feel like.
I think the biggest missing piece is what is this division about? What is it that caused this disagreement or maybe even all out war between the orders? Did it have to do with Voidbringers and the desolations? Was this like betrayal from the inside? Was it just politics? I feel like that's the big piece from the center of this puzzle we're missing.
I agree. We're definitely going to need that information before.
All right. The entirety of part 3, Elliot, I know you like to find themes in the entirety of part 3. We can start towards the wrap up of this episode. Let's talk about the entirety of part 3 of Words of Radiance.
Paul, do you want to say anything before I monologue again?
I'm straight out of saying things. So no.
Alrighty. So I probably not. Hopefully, I'm not going to talk as long as I normally do on themes. Even though this was a rather long part, actually, this was a lot of content spread across a lot of different characters and different scenarios that they were in. But I I pretty quickly came to a theme largely from the second half of this part of justice. I feel like a lot of our characters are battling with the concept of justice and whether do I take justice into my own hands? Do I enact justice on those around me? That's the dilemma all our characters are having, and we see Shalon. I think Shalon is just starting to discover this I think with her revelation that Amaram has Helloran's Shardblade. She I think is going to want justice on Amaram going forward. Kaladin has always wanted justice on Amaram, and he gets his chance, or he thinks he's got his chance to do it, and he acts on that, which we just kind of dissected that here at the end. But on top of that, you've got people like Moash talking about justice on Elokar, and kind of this bigger question of, is it right for people like Kaladin who have the means to just go and kill someone if they want? They have that power. Is that okay for him to do? Is that okay for him to take justice into his own hands like that? And I feel like that's the struggle all of our characters were having here, and even in like Adolin's world, I think it's still about getting justice on Sadius for the betrayal, for what he did to his family out on the plateau run. So that might not quite cover the first half of this part, but I think at least through the second half there was a very strong theme of justice through part 3.
Well put.
Okay, cool. With that, we will leave part 3 of Words of Radiance. We have interludes coming up, and Paul, you'll be happy to know that Zeth is on the title card for these interludes. So we do have a Zeth interlude coming up, and
I'm very excited.
we will be doing those next week. So thank you for joining me, Paul and Eliot, for the honor is dead, but I'll see what I can do scene. And we will reconvene next week.
Certainly, yeah.
I'm excited. I can't wait to see where this goes.